Hi everyone, today I will be discussing contemporary issue on standardized testing in education. A standardized test is a test that is administered under clearly defined and standard conditions of construction, administration, scoring, and for which scores have meaning derived from an interpretation system provided with the test. Standardized testing was originally designed to measure learning in fair and comparable ways. However, it has shifted from being a tool for assessment to a system that defines what counts as learning. The issue focuses on the overall reliance on standardized testing as the primary method of assessing student learning in education system. Specifically, this refers to the use of uniform, high-stake exams that prioritize measurable outcomes such as scores and rankings over deep forms of learning like critical thinking, reflection, and understanding. This issue is evident in schools and national education system, where test results are used to evaluate student ability, teacher effectiveness, and institutional performance. Context and background of the issue. The issue has emerged due to growing demand for accountability, comparability, and efficiency in mass education system. As education expanded globally, government required a standard way to measure student performance across large populations. Historically, this can be traced to an ancient China around the 3rd century BCE, when imperial exams were used to select government officials. These early tests aimed to create a system based on merit rather than social status. Moving into the 1800s, standardized testing spread to the West. Figures like Horace Mann introduced written exam in schools to create more consistent and comparable way of assessing students. In the early 1900s, testing became more formalized with the rise of IQ tests and college entrance exams. This marked a shift toward measuring intelligence and academic ability on a larger scale. In the 20th century, standardized testing was introduced to create fairness and objectivity in assessment, according to Shale et al. 2010. Over the time, testing became more central as education systems sought measurable indicators of success. Recent data suggests that standardized testing now play a significant role in determining student outcomes, school rankings, and even funding decisions, increasing its impact on teachings and learning practices, according to AU 2016. As a result, there has been a shift from testing as a tool to support learning to testing as a system that derives curriculum and instructions. Over the time, the issue has intensified with a greater emphasis on high-stake testing, leading to concerns about student stress and narrowed learning experiences, according to Segal et al. 2013. Why it matters? This issue matters because the standardized testing does not just measure learning. It actively shapes what is taught, how students learn, and how success is defined within education system, according to AU 2016. When learning is reduced to test performance, deeper skills such as critical thinking, creativity, and reflections are often undervalued. The consequences of this include a narrowing of the curriculum and the widespread practice of teaching to the test, where educators prioritize exam content over meaningful learning experiences. This can limit students' ability to engage in deeper, transformative learning as described by Jack Mazzaro. These disproportionately affect students who do not perform well in high-pressure exams, including those with different learning styles, neurodivergent learners, and students from under-resourced backgrounds. These students may be unfairly labeled as low achieving. Students may be unfairly labeled as low achieving despite demonstrating strong understanding in other contexts. The impact on students include increased stress, anxiety, and reduced confidence, particularly in high-stakes testing environment. For teachers, it can restrict professional autonomy and limits their ability to adapt teaching to students' needs. If unaddressed, this may lead to an education system that prioritizes performance over understanding, widens equity gap, and fails to prepare students with the critical and reflective skill needed for real-world challenges. There are several perspectives on standardized testing, and each highlights different priorities. From a policymaker perspective, testing is seen as an essential for accountability and comparisons. It provides clear data across schools and systems. However, this creates a tension between efficiency and deeper learning, because what is easy to measure becomes what is valued. From a teacher's perspective, tests can offer useful benchmark, but in practice, many teachers feel their autonomy is limited as they are pushed to teach to the test. So here we see a tension between accountability and professional judgment. Looking to the student, some benefit from clear expectations, but many experiences stress, anxiety, especially in a high-stake environment. This creates a tension between performance and well-being, and not all students were equally recognized. From the researcher's perspective, particularly Jack Mazzaro, learning should involve reflection and transformation. This directly conflicts with standardized testing, which focuses on fixed, measurable outcomes. So there is a fundamental tension between deep learning and the measurable performance. Finally, from the equity perspective, while testing appears fair because everyone takes the same exam, it can actually reinforce inequality. Students with more resources often perform better, highlighting the tension between equality and equity. Overall, the key issue is that what is measurable is not always what is meaningful in learning. This infographic explores the debate between measuring learning and meaningful learning, focusing on the increasing reliance on standardized testing within education system. While standardized testing is often justified as an efficient and objective way to assess student performance, it raises an important question: at what cost to learning and students themselves? At its core, the issue lies in how testing shapes what is valued in education. As shown in the infographic, the first key idea is that standardized testing defines what counts as success. High-stake exams influence what is taught in classroom, often pushing curriculum towards what is measurable rather than what is meaningful. This means that learning becomes focused on achieving scores and rankings rather than developing deep understanding. The second key idea highlights how testing can narrow learning and creativity. Practices such as teaching to the test limit opportunity for students to engage in critical thinking, collaboration, and real-world problem solving. The third key idea focuses on the impact on students and equity. Standardized testing environment create significant stress and anxiety, particularly in high-stake contexts. The infographic shows that around 70% of students report feeling stress about such testing. Additionally, this system can reinforce inequality as students from more advantaged backgrounds often have greater access to resources and support. The evidence section further highlighted that the impact extends beyond students. For an example, 90% of teachers reports that low NABLAN result can damage a school's reputation, affect enrollment, and lower staff morale, as noted by BAN 2023. This demonstrates that standardized testing influences not only learning but also teaching practices and institutional priorities. At the core of the infographic is a key tension between measurable outcome and meaningful learning. On the other hand, standardized testing provides clear data, comparability, and accountability. On the other hand, meaningful learning involves critical thinking, creativity, well-being, and the development of real-life skills. These are aspects of learning that are far more difficult to measure but are essential for long-term success. Ultimately, the key takeaway is that what is measurable is not always what is meaningful. While standardized testing can provide useful information, an over-reliance on it risks narrowing the purpose of education and reinforcing existing inequalities. This leads to a critical question. Are we truly measuring learning, or are we limiting what learning can be? I see it at my desk. The test paper face down. The atmosphere feels heavy, as if the result already belongs to me before I even began. The room is silent, but not calm. It feels dense, charged, like the air itself is waiting. When the teacher says, "You may begin," the result of the page sounds louder than it should. I read the first question, then again. Not because I don't understand, but because I'm afraid that one misstep will determine my future. My pen hesitates over the pages. I know this content. I have discussed it, questioned it, but here my understanding must compress into something measurable and exact. This is the fallacy of standardized testing. Not learning for exploration, but performance. I think about the parts of me in this test cannot see. The story I wrote that carried my voice. The relentless drive it took to never give up on getting the question right. The discussions I participated in did not have a clear answer. None of that matters here. None of that will be quantified. Some students across the room quickly jot down answers, while others don't move at all, paralyzed with uncertainty. I wonder what this test will say about us. Will it recognize growth, effort, potential, or rank us, reduce us, and move on? When the time is called, I put my pen down. I do not feel accomplished. I only feel measured. As I work out, I know that this test has quantified a score, but not understanding I could not help but ask who was really being tested.